Hi and welcome back to Mad About Cards and Crafts. Today I'm sharing two cards. One is a Mother's Day card and the second is a simple encouragement card using products from Pink Fresh Studio. I'm using the known and loved stamp set. This stamp set has many encouraging sentiments. If you're looking for a way to uplift a friend, this is a fantastic stamp set to have. It comes with the wreath, and then I have the die that will cut out the center of the die as well as the outside of the die. This English garden die is going to coordinate with the stamp set, but it also coordinates with this beautiful washi tape. If you are not a fan of coloring, if you are a fan of quick and easy cards, these two products are the perfect products for you. You are going to receive 7 images with each cut, and you are also going to have, I believe it's like a 40-foot roll. So if you like to mass produce cards, this is the perfect set. I love this Adore stamp and die set. It's one of my favorites, as well as the artistic bows. I think that this is a very versatile bow set. From Altenew, I do have the watercolor stencil, the Festive Lights paper. I'll be using that gold sheet. I did cut a piece of vellum to 4 inches, and I think it's by like 9 inches maybe. I'm using Pink Fresh Studio ink. I have Coral Reef and Sparkling Rose, but I do end up bringing in bubble gum. I have some foam squares, Gina K Design, champagne embossing powder, and Versamark ink. So I have cut my panel, as I said, to 4 inches wide, which is the width of the washi tape. Let me tell you that I did end up doing this twice. I wanted some more images to use later. So the second piece of paper, after doing it the first time right here, I cut my paper a little bit wider so I'm not worried about keeping the washi tape straight. So I was working out the wrinkles, trying to keep everything in line with my vellum, and I think if I know because I did it again, when you have a little bit wider width of vellum, you have a little more wiggle room with that. So I'm going to take the upper portion of the die, which is going to cut out a beautiful wreath and also a floral cluster in the center, and then I'm going to turn my paper and I'm going to cut out the remaining images. I believe there's a total of 7 images that cut out, so you have tons of possibilities with this washi tape. You are going to get a ton of cards, a lot of bang for your buck, and you don't have to do any coloring yourself. Once I get these pieces out, I'm going to start working on my sentiment. I did, actually I'm going to stamp the wreath. I did cut out the word mom using those Adore dies because I did need them for placement. I wanted to know where I needed that wreath to be so that I could still fit my word on there. And I'm going to heat emboss this wreath using Gina K Design's champagne embossing powder. Unfortunately, the champagne embossing powder is no longer available, but gold would be just as pretty. I did use my anti-static tool, and I am stamping onto a piece of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock. And then I'm going to bring out my coffee filter. I do have my heat tool heating up over on the side, and then we're going to start working on our word mom. When I do start stamping, I'm going to be doing some ombre stamping, and I'm going to use the Coral Reef, and I bring in the bubblegum from Pink Fresh Studio. The bubblegum ends up being a little bit too bright, so when I do stamp, I'm going to stamp 2 more times using just the Coral Reef, and that's going to tone down that pink. I cut my panel down to 4 inches by 5¼ inches. I am going to do a little bit of layering, so I wanted to make sure that that layer underneath is going to show through. This stamp set, as I said, is beautiful. There is an outline piece for these letters, and I'm going to bring those in shortly. You can use them without the outline or with. For this card, I felt that it added a little more something to the card to have that outline. I think it dressed it up a little bit, made those letters stand out just a little bit more. And here I'm going to finish up with the final M. And then I'm going to bring in, I believe, those outline pieces. When I bring in those outline pieces, I originally thought that if I used my Versamark pen, it would be easier, but I quickly found out that it wasn't easy to use the Versamark pen to do the embossing. I am going to end up getting my fingers a little bit sticky and sticking those outline pieces into my Versamark. Now here I did cut out the word mom one more time. Typically I cut my letters out 4 times, 3 or 4 times. Here I only did it twice. I didn't want too much dimension, but I did want a little bit more dimension so that when I add that outline to these letters, it stands out just a little bit more. I have a piece of foam right here. This is fun foam, and I'm going to cut it down 1/4 of an inch smaller, and then I'm going to use my art glitter glue and I'm going to glue this piece down. So there are my letters. I'm going to glue them down, and as you can see, I'm just eyeing them. I do have a T-square ruler, but when I tried to use it, because it was so close to the bottom of the panel, the bottom of the letters, it kept slipping off and it was becoming more of a hindrance than it was a help. As you can see, there are the outlines to those letters in the upper portion. I did use a piece of Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock, some Versamark ink, and came back in with that champagne embossing powder so that I can get a nice piece of paper that will match perfectly with the rest of the embossing on this card. Here's where I'm using that pen. I realized my fan was on and I was like, oops, I better try to emboss this now. And I don't get it, the embossing powder doesn't stick great right here, but I do stick with it because I don't want to ruin my Versamark pad. A lot of times I will stick my embossed image and there'll be like stray embossing powder somewhere, and then it just gunks up my pad, and I don't like that. So I went ahead and stuck with the pen for the O, but as you could see, I got my hands sticky and I just used the pad for the rest of the outlines. I'm going to have one little spot that I missed on this one. I'll re-ink it. There we go. And now it's perfect. Now these letters, I've heard people say that they have a difficult time with them. If you don't stretch the word, okay, or the letters, I should say, if you don't stretch them, if you leave them just the way that they are and don't pull and tug on them, they fit nicely. Look at how perfectly they are fitting around these letters. I have never had any problem with that. I think when you try to stretch them around something is when you start bending them out of shape. But for me, these go on very nicely, and I really think that it really helps to accentuate that word. So there we go. What I should have done before I laid my letters down is I should have done my stenciling, but have no fear. I do have a mask that I created using that die for the wreath. I'm just figuring out which way it needs to go. I have a piece of tape on the back side of this, and I'm going to lay my stencil over the top. I did use the coral reef, as we talked about, on the word mom, and because I did, and because that's going to be the bottom of my ombre, when I go over or barely touch the letters, it's not going to hinder it at all. So you're not going to see any of the marks from the sponge dauber. It's going to be seamless. I'm starting with the sparkling rose, and then I'm going to bring in the coral reef, and I did go over one of the lines that had the sparkling rose so that I got that little bit of a blend, and I'm just trying to get in between my letters. There's one little spot that I need to get. There we go. And that finishes off the stenciling. Now I'm going to glue this to my gold card panel, and then I'm going to bring in those pieces from the English Garden set. There is a swag of roses, a leaf cluster, and then I'm going to use a butterfly as well. So I'm going to add foam dimension to the back of this, and using the foam dimension, because I have that washi tape over it, it camouflages that foam dimension perfectly. You don't see it at all. I'm using some smaller pieces for the leaf, and then I'm going to end up cutting off that stem because it's just too hard to tuck everything under, and I'm not getting it in the place that I want to get it. So I do end up tucking it right here. And once I tuck that, I'm going to add a piece of foam to the butterfly, and I will add the butterfly. I'm going to glue this to a piece of Neenah Solar White 110-pound cardstock. I have a top folding card base that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and that's going to complete my first card. Now we're going to use the same piece, the same supplies, I should say, that I used in the first card, and we're going to create a second card. So again, this is going to be a top folding card. I am going to use a piece of 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock. I thought originally that I might use both of those wreaths and put them on both corners and then cut them off, but then I decided that I really liked keeping it as the center of the attention on my card. I'm going to do the same ombre ink blending, sparkling rose, and then I'll bring in that calypso, or that coral wreath, I'm sorry. And so I'll blend that. There are a couple of, you can see there's like distressed lines in that watercolor stencil. I'm going to fill those in on this section of the card. It gives it more of a watercolored look, just a little bit. On the other one, you really didn't notice it. So here I'm going to put my wreath on. I am going to glue it directly to my panel, and then I'm going to add some foam to the center of that floral cluster. So when I do use my art glitter glue, as I said, because it is, the vellum is covered with the washi tape, you do not see the glue at all. And I decided that I was going to put that smack dab in the center, and here I'm adding that foam dimension to my floral. And instead of putting a sentiment on the front of my card, I'm going to finish the inside of my card. I wanted to add a bow to the wreath, and this is where that artistic bows comes in. That double bow, I'm going to cut it and create a single bow, but first I'm using that wreath from the Known and Loved set, and I am stamping it using both the sparkling rose and the coral reef, so I have a little bit of ombre going on, but I still think that it's a little bit too stark white for my card, so I will come in with the sponge dauber and the sparkling rose, and I am going to just ink it up a little bit to kind of tone down that white. I did use a pen to what's the word I'm looking for, to bend the paper so that it was easy for me to fold over. This would be a lot easier if I had glue dots. I don't have any glue dots, so I do have to use my reverse tweezers and my art glitter glue. I'm going to clip that bow so that I get two different bows, and then I'm going to use the piece that goes around the center, and I'm going to have to do a little bit of trimming. There are two sizes, and I don't know if I grabbed the wrong size. There's a thinner one, and then I think there's one that's a little bit shorter. This one was a little bit too long, so I went ahead and just trimmed it down, and then I let it dry. And here's where I'm going to come in with that sponge dauber, and I'm going to ink up that bow. So I used the pen just to add a little more fluff to my bow. I'm a bow girl. I love bows on everything. True story, when my husband first met me the very first time, he knew a friend of mine and came over to my house to visit her. It was later in the evening, and I was wearing some of those like little feety pajamas, some pink feety pajamas. Mind you, this was the 80s. And I had my hair up in a big ponytail, and I had a huge satin ribbon in my hair. So in high school, satin ribbons were the big thing in the 80s. And yeah, I have always loved bows. I've always been attracted to them, and it was something that was a part of my teenage years. Here I'm adding some foam to the back of this card panel, and you can see that I did cut out that gold cardstock. It's cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I'm going to center this onto that panel. Actually, no, it's cut to 4 by 5 1/4. I apologize. And then I'm going to center this, and we're going to have a 1/4 inch border all the way around. I'm going to cut the inside panel to 4 by 5 1/4, and I'm going to stamp it with my sentiment. I do have a leftover piece of that gold paper, so I'm going to add that strip to the bottom. And then I'll trim it off, and I'll glue this to the inside of my card, and that is going to be my second card. I want to thank you so much for watching today. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, I would love for you to subscribe, ring the bell so that you're notified whenever I upload a video. Here's a look at my 2 cards again. Thank you again for watching. Have a fabulous day.